Well, welcome to an intimate, relaxing setting where you can ask me anything. I thought what I would do, did any of the folks here hear our presentation yesterday around super pollutants with Amazon? Okay. So maybe as we're having our first or second cups of coffee, let me indulge in, I'll just give you a little bit of background of why I'm in this space and what ClimeCo has done and what I was always passionate about. And then we could kind of open it up. Because I think there's a story here about sustainability and profitability that I want to share. So as a meteorologist, that I later went on to get a business degree because I figured I couldn't forecast the weather so well. I better figure out how to do business. Well, my background is science, and I was doing air quality work in the U.S. For a company from 1991 to 2007. So I was in the vintage where everybody stayed at least that long at their first job. So I had a nice run of doing air quality work, but the United States wasn't focusing on greenhouse gases. Everything was non-greenhouse gases. Like regulations were non-methane hydrocarbons. So you couldn't be more specific. Greenhouse gases were not regulated whatsoever. And then dating myself, under the Bush administration, they had the administration did not ratify the global Kyoto Protocol, which was really the first protocol that, Annex I countries, Western European countries, had standards to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, and around 189 other countries had ratified it to participate. So I was excited about this mechanism because it was a kind of a technology transfer mechanism where if you're a German company and you couldn't reduce your emissions at cost effectively, or a French company, Spanish company, anybody in what we called the Annex I countries, you could invest under the clean development mechanism in the countries that ratified that were non-Annex I. So these were the countries like all the Latin American companies, Southeast Asia countries, all these other countries around the world that ratified the protocol that were considered developing economies, as opposed to the developed economies in Western Europe. So imagine cap and trade, developed economies, developing economies. So it was a global treaty, and if you ratified the protocol as a developing economy, you could develop carbon reduction projects in your country, and they could be funded by Western Europe. So it was a technology transfer. So some of the technologies that were being deployed were Western European technologies that said, hey, if I deploy this project in Chile or Mexico or the Ukraine, in Eastern Europe, Ukraine, I could harvest the carbon credits under the United Nations protocol and bring those carbon credits back to my own obligations as a Western European company. So how do you get the best bang for your buck or best bang for your euro? Where should I invest my capital to decarbonize? So it was really a creative process initially launched by the United Nations. There was an executive committee, executive board that reviewed all the protocols. There were verification bodies around the world that were verifying projects that had to be approved by the United Nations. And then bureaucracy came in, right? Under the UN, you can imagine, just the challenges of getting a protocol approved by the United Nations, headquartered out of Germany, and then actually deploy that protocol in developing countries with all the country risks that you have associated with deploying capital in other countries, and then harvesting that carbon and getting it certified as a certified emission reduction credit under that mechanism and transferring it to the buyer. So that was the whole protocol, that was the whole setup. And I just got done with an MBA in finance, and I thought, holy crap, like with a background in meteorology, and now I understand a little bit of finance, is carbon a financing tool that we could use to deploy technologies around the world to accelerate decarbonization? So as I was going through that and I was excited about it, the Bush administration failed to ratify the protocol, so the United States wasn't participating. There are some reasons why. So the biggest pressure, the reason why actually Russia and the US didn't ratify, so we were bedfellows with Russia back then, and again. But one of the reasons why the U.S. didn't ratify is really because of the threat of China at the time. Is that China had ratified it, but they were considered a developing economy. So they didn't have a requirement to reduce their emissions, but yet we could reduce emissions there and create a revenue stream for China as we were selling those credits outside of the country. So the U.S. looked at that and they said, why is China developing a country and we're developed? Like, we don't have that same mechanism available for us. If we sign the protocol, we're going to have to reduce and then invest in other countries or invest within our own country to decarbonize. So the Bush administration viewed it as a competitive disadvantage with China. So we failed to ratify, and then I failed to continue with my current job. So I said, screw this, I'm out. I left a 16-year career and I jumped into the international world, and I said, I want to go work in countries that actually ratified this because I want to learn. So I dove off into the abyss to work for a company that 18 months later went bankrupt. They were traded on the London Stock Exchange, and we were developing projects in Mexico and Brazil and Malaysia around methane collection at swine farms and palm oil facilities. And we were harvesting the carbon, the methane reductions, and selling that through this the UN procedure. They overpromised, underdelivered. They as a financing tool, they sold the contracts forward, meaning they took money now for future delivery of carbon credits. And they had a failure to deliver clause that I think the first week that I started there, they posted a $50 million loss. That's hard for a company. Because when they raised money by selling credits that they were going to deliver a year from now, but when they weren't able to deliver, the penalty in the contract was they had to go to market to purchase the replacement credits. So imagine selling credits, getting money now at €5, and then the market was up and to the right, and they had to purchase at like €18 for all the replacement credits. So imagine taking 5 in, but losing €13 for every unit that you brought. So that was the craziness of the market at the time. Really innovative folks, but 18 months later they went belly up. So I learned a lot. I was globetrotting around the world figuring out how to decarbonize profitably. And then I started ClimeCo in 2000, at the end of 2008. So I moved back up. I was living in Mexico at the time, moved back up to Miami. It's a perfect place for Spanglish. I could use a little bit of Spanish that I learned and fit right in Miami. So we started ClimeCo in Miami, but the main focus was what did we learn? Like what did I learn from the battle scars that I have? And one of the things that we focused on is, the company that I was working with, they were trying to develop these really small swine dairies. All these risks in Malaysia for the palm oil. Imagine 600 digesters in Mexico and Brazil, and then dealing with all of the in-country issues with, did they really build what they said they were going to build? I mean, when you're digging and building that many digesters at one time, they were so small. And I thought to myself, when I started ClimeCo, I don't want to go small. Like, I want to go big. Where are the largest U.S. sources of greenhouse gases, and how can we abate those emissions profitably? Instead of having a dairy farm have 10,000 credits a year and then dealing with all the country risks, how can I go into a facility with a minimum of 500,000 tons a year at one facility and really scale the business? So, we started to say, how do we use capital markets to solve a problem? And most of these large sources of emissions were in petrochemical plants. That was our original focus, is abating nitrous oxide. I talked about it a little bit, the other day. And when you're going into these petrochemical plants, and I'm going in with a business plan now, I'm saying you've got 1 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent coming out of your exhaust stack. I know the Clean Air Act doesn't regulate nitrous oxide, but I have a proposal for you. You may view this as inconsequential because there's no requirement. You can just emit N2O. There's no price to that externality. You can continue on with life. But do you realize that in the future, sustainability and lowering your carbon footprint is going to matter? And one day, now I'm still wrong about this, one day US EPA may actually regulate it. We certainly know under this administration that's not going to happen. But part of the threat that we said is if the EPA is going to regulate it, imagine if we have a strategy for you that we could abate your emissions now. We can make a market for this. So if we do this right, we can certify the reductions, and I can bring investors in to fund it. So I know you may not believe in climate change, but that's okay. Like, you don't have to. If you want to talk to me about climate change, I'm a climate scientist. I can debate it. I can talk to you about it. But I never led with climate change. I never led with you're responsible. I simply said there's an amazing opportunities to reduce your emissions profitably. And by the way, when I was overseas, I identified technologies that aren't that novel. They just need to be integrated into your facility, and we can do it. So our first project was in Baytown, Texas. And I remember the leadership there was nervous at first because there's always the risk of the technology affecting their main process. So we certainly had to get over hurdles to make sure that they realized that our technology was not going to affect their production of ammonium nitrate. But once we got through that and we developed the first project, they got to see how it worked. And to this day, at that site, we generated over 10 million tons of carbon dioxide credits. Every credit has sold. The site is profitable. All the revenue covers all the operational expenditures and creates a positive rate of return. And we reduced at that one site in Baytown, Texas, profitably 10 million tons. That was cool, but to get there, we had to write a methodology to do it. Imagine 2 years of investment. As I started ClimeCo with no money, because guess what? 2009, you couldn't raise any money. If y'all remember the mortgage-backed security collapse, so we had no equity infusion in the company. So we really had to be careful about how we did this. But we had to write a methodology that got listed at a leading registry that said at fertilizer plants like we're focusing on, this is the baseline, this is the technology that we can install, this is how we're going to measure it, this is the delta, the difference, and this is how we're going to certify that. And it sounds simple, but that's like a 100-page methodology to do what I just said, because there's a lot of calculations in there. And every facility has continuous monitors, so every minute we're getting data, very permanent, very transparent. But we had to spend a lot of time to write the methodology. This is the foundation of our future. We had to get it right. And the Climate Action Reserve, which is one of the registries that we work with, took a hold of that registry, and then that took a hold of that methodology, and then it becomes public, which I really think is important about all of our processes here, is that we may have had the original pen on the methodology, but once we hand it over to a registry, we become a work group member. We don't own it anymore. Then it goes out and it's debated, rigorously debated. Industry looks at it, they challenge it. NGOs look at it, they challenge it. So there's a whole working group that ultimately all those comments, public goes out to public, they challenge it. After all that process, it's finally issued. And then you can have amendments to it afterwards, but it's like a 2-year process. So we had to go through all of that and then tell our clients, trust me, we're gonna get the methodology done so we can integrate the technology, and we're also making a market. Trust me, trust me, trust me. It was all about trust. And then once it started to happen, people realized that it was the real thing. And then scale that forward, just one last example, then we said, okay, if we're good at nitrous oxide, where's the real scale of nitrous oxide? And the largest point source of emissions in the United States was a nylon 6,6 plant. Not to get too techie, but adipic acid goes into nylon 6,6. When you make adipic acid, you make a lot of N2O, and that goes right to the atmosphere because it blows through all of your control equipment. So a facility in Pensacola was emitting 6 million tons a year of carbon dioxide. They were on the radar screen of Biden-Harris. Why shouldn't we have a regulation? Well, it was the only facility in the U.S. that had that issue. So it's kind of hard to get U.S. EPA to focus on regulating one plant. They're looking at a sector. So we went in with the voluntary carbon market and installed incredible amount of equipment to destroy 99% of those emissions and generate every day. I look at the real-time data that comes through. It's 15,000 to 20,000 tons a day of CO2 reductions that we got. And we funded all of it. This is a 50 million plus investment. We funded all of it using the voluntary carbon market. So the facility is able to do it profitably. So that's my one going to open it up as our dialogue, but my story here is I believe that industry has a contribution to climate change as a climate scientist, and I believe that we don't need to shame industries. We can work with them to do it profitably, and then help them tell the story, because right now a lot of our clients that we are abating, and we're much more than N2O. We do a lot more than that across the globe, but I'm focusing just a little bit on the upfront story of our foundation. But we can do it profitably, and now the products that they're making, we're seeing customers want low carbon content products, whether or not it's ammonium nitrate in fertilizer. Look at the stories about PepsiCo investing in insetting now around the reductions of their supply chain. A lot of our projects are right in that supply chain. So instead of selling offsets, now we're bundling those reductions with the product and embedding it. That's why I think one day, when there's a green premium, one day the sale of offsets should go away. The challenge that we have right now is that the green premium isn't clear. So we like the optionality of being able to sell the credit separately from the product, and then once the product is sold, it's just a conventional product. It's stripped of all the environmental attributes because they're sold separately. So accounting comes into play here significantly. We got to get the accounting right. But I think one day the green premium, as we're marketing this, I believe carbon offsets should go away in maybe a decade. I think it'll take that long. So I always say to our company, we're evolving. Let's continue to decarbonize, but let's really think about the supply chains now. And we're doing that. We're doing that actively. So that's the evolution of the company. Foundation is nitrous oxide. Foundation is doing it profitably. I said in my message, and it upsets some people, that if it's not profitable, it's not sustainable. I lived it. I saw it. All those projects that I spoke about on the UN, do you know how many of those projects removed their control devices simply because the emission credits price fell? So it's a shame. So the glorious story about the Kyoto is that there was action done. The horrible story about Kyoto is a lot of it was reversed once the certified emission reduction credits dropped to like 10 euro cents. Companies didn't care. So in our world, profitability does matter. It has to be part of the story. And then since we started that business, we grew our practice to do a lot of other things. Methane, we do. Also refrigerants, just like Amazon was talking about. We're also involved in decarbonizing shipping. We're lowering the carbon footprint of cement. But we had to have, a beachhead. Like, where did we land to create a positive rate of return for ClimeCo, so we can reinvest the money? So when I talk about positive rates of return, even with our team, who's very impact oriented, I have to make sure I calibrate our earnings to impact. If I talk about too much as the CEO about our earnings, I can tell you I lose people within my company. So what I have to make sure I do is I have to calibrate. I have to calibrate that if we're not making money, we can't reinvest. So that's a lot of our discussion today, is how can you be profitable while you're decarbonized? And let's open her up. That's my journey. Yes, sir.
What you're not producing. And it's evolving, and there's still kind of a nascent market for adding up or creating a value for the inset that works on the same market level as an offset. Mm-hmm. And the offsets have kind of a bad rep, and there's a lot of skepticism about how real they are. But the insets are actually very easy to calculate and validate. And I was just curious if other product classes could be adapted to the same thing, to say, look, this product is something that by buying that or using it, you're avoiding taking, precious metals or minerals from the earth, and you can clearly measure what you're not extracting and create a carbon inset market that is more easily adapted and validated than a carbon offset market. Does that make sense?
It does. And now, years ago, we were working with a Canadian company that was doing just what you described on computers, and they tried to go down the offset path, and that actually wasn't a clear path. It's a much better story to tell that story as an inset, working with the computer sector, for instance. So I think what we were looking at doing is extending the life. So if you extend the life and reissue a warranty and replace some of the components, by extending that, you're avoiding that from going into the landfill. And we had worked with the company to do an LCA around that. And so I think certain stories like that are a much better fit for an inset, because when they were trying to go for an offset, actually we walked away from it because it wasn't a credible baseline. It was so difficult to really So I always say that offsets are so restrictive. I feel like it's a box. You can't get creative because of the additionality, the permanence, the financial additionality, market-based additionalities. It's got to fit right in there. But then you get these incredible stories like you just described. And I wouldn't be surprised if one of our partners, Lenovo, around the world is looking at that too, because they're a global partner. And I could say through mechanisms like that, Lenovo is decarbonizing their laptop to, it's probably about 0.3 tons on a laptop now, to not only generate it, but to use it for 5 years. And then that 0.3 tons, we're also mitigating it with our carbon, but they're working really hard to reduce that through technologies like you're just describing. So I think that's the perfect story for an inset. And then the question is, like, how are we driving value? How are we marketing that? And it's really no different than what we're doing in Nylon 6/6. It's the same story. I mean, we're working with a sports apparel company, and they're looking at the amount of Nylon 6/6 in their ski pants and their skis. But I got to tell you that it's challenging to get it right, because as an inset, then if we're bringing Nylon 6/6 into their facility or into their product line, we're only using the same amount of offsets that's proportional to the amount of Nylon 6/6 used in each component. So you got to get the accounting right to make the claims right. And then, we're on, I think you may know about the AIM platform and some other platforms. We're an investor in that. So we really believe in getting it right. We really believe in the greenhouse gas protocol, allowing for book and claim, allowing for creative mechanisms like this. And we saw some progress recently with the draft. And now we're also hoping that SBTI supports that, because I think SBTI is one of the drivers of Scope 3 reductions. So we want to really make sure that we have credibility in how our clients can achieve their Scope 3. But I love that story, and I think that's where the market needs to go.
It's also tied to it. Like in Europe, there's legislation or regulation that will kick in next year around digital product passports, and the requirement to document among lots of other things, the carbon footprint of every product. And I think it starts actually with textiles, and for us, electronics is coming a little bit later. But at the end of the day, every product manufactured or entering into Europe will have to have a digital product passport, where you document what the footprint was of that, so that down the road, as you reuse it, refurbish it, harvest the components of it, you can actually measure potentially the inset value of reuse for that, which, I mean, it's quite easy in a way with IT equipment, but with textiles, I just think there's a hell of a market to be created for insets across a whole range of product categories, particularly when you've got technology building around AI that can populate a digital product passport, and all the different players in the life cycle of a product that's going to have to contribute data to that, when it was repaired, when it was resold, and what is the life cycle. And I'm just curious if there are there market creation I don't know, activities or movement. Is anyone doing it? Like, is anyone trying to create a market for other kinds of product categories that would fuel the moving in the right direction around reuse? And
I mean, 100%. I think that's where evolution is. And that's why I think our business is drastically going to change in the next 5 to 10 years. I know we just launched an insetting procedure to document into brand on insets. So that's a new protocol that went through public comment that ClimeCo brought to the table because we believe we need more clarity and more definition of how it's done. But I'm seeing a lot of progress on that, and I think it's very similar to I think Michelle had mentioned our Amazon platform. When we're working with companies to earn a badge on that Amazon platform, they have to upload their life cycle assessment for every SKU, and if they don't have it for every SKU, now we are using, at least for the first level, so they don't ever have to leave the data portal site. We're using AI agents for certain sectors, to get plus or minus 20% of their LCA. Then that will go out to an auditor and the gaps will be filled in, but we're using, to the extent that we can, kind of machine learning to fast track that, because to do LCAs for everybody's SKU is just going to be impossible. So we are trying to leverage AI and machine learning, but it all starts with that credible baseline. And even with our protocol with Amazon, if you're not decarbonizing your supply chain, if you're not showing measurable differences, you get kicked out of the program. Like, you can't just rely on our offsets to affix it to your product to earn the label. You have to show measure, and I love that about the program, because I think, as I like to talk about offsets, I also like to say we're not here for companies to overly rely on them. It's a mechanism to bridge, but we want companies to start doing the right thing as well within their own supply chain.
There it is. Speaking of supply chain, I work in supply chain at Schneider Electric on the decarbonization side. Carbon insetting is really complicated from a data perspective. So what does this kind of look like? Is it a utility bill management, interval data management, LCA, a mix of different perspectives determined based on the client? So like, we're looking at like a steel manufacturer. We might be looking more at energy efficiency type measures versus like Nike or something. We might be looking more at circularity. So what does that kind of look like?
Yeah, really case by case, and Schneider's done great things, by the way. Like, you're a leader in the space and a customer of ours too, so I appreciate everything Schneider's doing. But that's a really tough question and a deep one. I think the challenge is just understanding, starting with that really in-depth life cycle. Like for steel, aluminum, we're also looking at kind of low carbon aluminum, certainly working with some of the hyperscalers to support insets around aluminum innovation. And some of that innovation could come from the smelters themselves and different technologies at that level. Certainly within that life cycle would be renewable energy associated with the production of it. So bundling everything proportionally to the product. I like to say it starts with one of our teammates called it a nutritional label. Imagine a nutritional label on all the products that you buy. Right now, if I go to Starbucks and I see 1,000 calories for one little Danish, I feel like maybe I'm shamed in that label means something to me. I may not buy it. Or if I'm stupid hungry, I say I don't care. But at least I make a choice. It's given to me. And I think at the end of the day, I see all products with a nutritional label with respect to their carbon content.
And I know that there's like also challenges in getting data from suppliers because it can be difficult for sharing of data and what that looks like. So I guess, what are some ways to resolve that piece from your perspective?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about an example that we struggle with a lot. So like right now, we're in China. We're abating 30 million tons right now with 3 technologies that we installed. And so in order to get in there and to put our brand on it, we had to put continuous monitors in and have data export transparency out every hour from the facilities, or we would not work with them. But one of the challenges that I run into honestly, is that, as we're looking at even selling it as an inset or buyers of nylon 6,6 from those facilities, I get into phone calls with folks that say, well, this is great, but the other companies that are selling nylon 6X out of China are not transparent about their data, and they're already saying that their footprint is already mitigated, but we know it isn't. So this is a big head wall that I'm up against, because as an investor in China, how do I hold the others accountable to the same standards that I'm creating? Other than the fact that we have the data to say, in fact, I just spoke with a nylon 6,6 buyer, and I said, if you buy from our plant, we have the data. If the data isn't transparent on the other side, maybe it's just binary. Just don't trust it. Assume it isn't real. So unless you have the data integrity that we bring, but that's a challenge that I'm up against. And a lot of companies don't want to share their data because it's even trade secret in their minds, right? So that's going to be a huge hurdle, which is why I still like in the interim having the optionality of a certified metric ton of carbon that I've reduced, because thank God at least there's a market for that. I can create it, but it's a huge issue. I'm gonna run into this a lot more.
Good morning. My name is Lizzie Boo. I'm with the United States Postal Service. I am with the group that measures and reports the Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 greenhouse gas to the Federal Energy Management Program and also to the International Post Corp, amongst others. And I was wondering if you could talk about some emerging strategies and technologies that would continue to aid us. I mean, we have goals that we plan to meet by 2030. We are on track to meet those goals, so we need to come up with some new goals. So I'd like to hear about what's new in the industry that could help us in the future.
To decarbonize as USPS.
Yep.
Oh my God, I'm so happy you're here.
With 32,000 locations across the country and 200,000 vehicles. Help us out.
I'm so glad that you're still employed.
I am too.
Isn't it refreshing to hear that USPS, and I've heard this in other areas of the agency, is that you'll be surprised that pockets still exist that are doing great things. So thank you. And I think it's a complex. So we definitely work with companies similar to yours in the private sector that deliver freight around the globe. And we worked with one recently. I think it went public with our SBTI. No. All right. So we set an SBTI goal for a large transport, a large carrier as well, working with them to also create a pathway for decarbonization. Sometimes we start where what makes sense, of course. What's crazy expensive in some ways is SAF-C. Looking at sustainable aviation fuel. But a lot of it also is looking at vehicle transportation. A lot of the competitors for USPS has done a lot of optimization with respect to transportation pathways, minimization. So the whole supply chain of getting the product there. I think looking at electrification of vehicles, looking at investing in transportation emissions in general. But I think we have a whole team that just focuses on transportation and shipping. So I think we could certainly go back, and if you have some questions, I can connect you with the right folks. But I think my biggest excitement was that you actually said that you're still actively footprinting and you're looking at ways that you can be competitive to the UPSs and the FedExes and the other organizations out there, because I can tell you that in that space, people are more aware of the footprint associated with the delivery of their package and how rapidly they get it and how rapidly they need it. So transportation emissions in general are significant, and I'm excited that you're here.
Well, thank you. We are always looking for ways to improve efficiency and get rid of waste and reduce costs. Mm-hmm. So, thank you.
Yeah, and reducing the costs is when we get into the marine area, why do we have 250 vessels on the oceans that are retrofitted, It's because we retrofitted the vessels with whether or not they're energy efficient turbines or hull coatings, but at the end of the day, they're saving fuel. So that's the driver again, right? Is that it has to be a bottom line savings. In this case, they're saving bunker fuel for every ship that's retrofitted, and we're documenting the bunker fuel that's saved based on the retrofits we installed at the dry dock in Norway, and we're tracking those vessels around the globe, and that data is used to support. It could be an inset for the folks that have product on that ship. So it's very similar in lots of ways. I think we could take a lot of our lessons learned in even the marine sector to look at the main driver. But again, if they weren't saving money on fuel, we wouldn't be retrofitting those vehicles or the vessels, right? It just wouldn't happen. So amazing. Thanks.
Hi, I'm wondering if you've done any work in the hyperscale data center space, and if so, are there any existing or emerging technologies that could enable carbon credit sales for that industry?
Wow, what a complicated stack, right? It's like, it seems like it's the, it's all out there. We see it. Let me tell you what we're doing so far and what some of the hyperscalers are doing. We're all aware of the footprint. We're all aware that renewables aren't going to fuel them. We're all aware that gas turbines are coming back to the market to support all of our needs. How many were on AI today? We're driving the demand that's requiring gas turbines to come back because there's not enough renewable. I was just talking to Williams, who's putting in a massive gas turbine behind the meter for a data center. But they're also looking at carbon capture options around the gas turbine. So they're not turning their heads to innovation around kind of more conventional energy. Where we like to talk to the hyperscalers is two different phases: the construction of the data center. So there was a lot of public RFPs out by Meta, for instance, just as an example, of them looking to source insets around a wide variety of products: steel, cement, aluminum, fibers for their cables, you name it. So I think that there's the hyperscalers are looking at responsible build on sourcing low carbon products, and that kind of factors right into our insetting strategy. So I think that's really important. We've definitely been looking at the hyperscalers to look at, is there a kind of a white glove treatment or white glove that we could give them? They're responsible for the data center build. We know that renewable energy isn't available for all of these locations. How do we team up with the classic energy provider to essentially overlay investments around the globe, a harmonized portfolio around avoidance and removal credits, so we can overlay that onto their footprint, so we can show that as they're building, they're also mitigating on a one-to-one basis. So I think there's a lot of strategies that we're talking about, but one of the challenges that we have is who's the right decision maker. It's like, if you go to a hyperscaler, then you'll find out that there's like 20 firms, 20 companies underneath that stack to make the build. And you go into the private equity firm that's investing in it. There's like the EQTs and the Equinoxes of the world. Are they a decision maker? Is it a level up? Is it all the way up? So I think it's a lot of, this is who you speak to. So I wish I had the path to figure out really how to partner with them, but it is exciting when I'm starting to see at least RFPs around insets in green, the green premium, or looking at low carbon content for construction material. I think that's a big start. But I am a little concerned just about the energy. It's a challenge to match the energy needed for all these systems, and so be ready. Be ready for what we're seeing right now, which is kind of gas turbines coming back, and so how are the hyperscalers going to mitigate that impact? And we need to find out how to work with them more closely on this. But I think in some ways it's a little bit down the stream yet, right? It's not quite here. It's a lot of talk.
Yeah, I would just say too, we're seeing sort of the priority being speed, right? So all the data centers are just building as fast as they possibly can. So we know that it's coming, and the consideration will trickle down from the hyperscalers down to the sort of layers of the onion that Bill just described. But right now the priority is speed. So helping them sort of shift the language from sustainability to efficiency to risk mitigation, resilience, all of that. So.
So my background is in finance and corporate strategy. I spent 10 years with a transportation company, and we were trying to drive some of our sustainability strategy. And the main source of decarbonization was reduction in diesel fuel utilization, and trying to find alternatives to that, exploring hydrogen, exploring battery. But the argument we kept on running into was just the cost of those technologies relative to diesel, and so investing in that, the business case wasn't there. Now, one of my primary arguments was about de-risking the supply chain, especially as it came to diesel. And we're seeing, why that is important today, right? The considerable increase in the cost. And so I'm just curious, have you had success with that as an element of selling investments, the risk factor or trying to de-risk the supply chain?
Yeah, that's a tougher one because I think our clients struggle with that because it's really hard for the CFO and the CEO the CSOs are having a difficult time communicating that to the decision makers. Oftentimes, our real change occurs when we're working directly with the CFO or CEO, not necessarily the CSO. And so I think there's a language gap between the two because, de-risk, like you just said, what does that really mean to our bottom line and to our shareholders? I think there are some protocols and some projects that have been done on like fleet electrification. And hydrogen conversion or electric conversion, and those vehicles actually, qualifying for carbon offsets to help fund those technologies. So I think the voluntary carbon market has tried to support that as again, a gap fill for that. I know the voluntary carbon market has also worked on truck electrification, meaning that, a lot of the trucks that would go to the pilot and idle, now they can plug in. They don't need to idle anymore. And probably one of the more successful earlier carbon projects were associated with like the pilots of the world, in making sure that, when you go into these facilities, they're all idling trucks. How do you avoid that? So I think we're always looking at ways for the VCM to be the bridge to get over to what you just said as a real big issue. Hydrogen, hydrogen highway, how many times did we used to talk about that? And where has it gone, right? So I think that's always a challenge for us. I'd like to talk to you more about innovation in that area. I think because it's been a challenge for us, we've migrated into other areas where we could have a cleaner story and a cleaner reduction. But selling it on the risk of the supply chain, as a quant in a mathematics or as a finance guy, I'd love to see that analysis so, I could help tell that story. But I would agree with you, that's a challenge. It's a challenge we have, which is why the transportation sector itself isn't a major focus of ours. Yeah. From a fleet standpoint like that, yeah.
Hi, so I'm currently a student at the University of Texas at Dallas, majoring in computer science. And recently, a few friends of mine and I had started looking at projects and research regarding the improved battery life of EVs, hydrogen vehicles. It started with hydrogen vehicles, but we weren't able to get the resources necessary for going forward in there. One of the questions I had is that with carbon emissions, heat is one of the biggest things that also is generated, and that significantly affects the overall degradation life, or overall degradation. Is there, and as a computer science student, I just want to know, you had mentioned earlier about using agentic AI and models. Do you see any way of using agentic AI or models in this particular degradation field?
Great question. I'm glad you're a student right now trying to figure this out. I would say I don't have an answer to that. You know, I think we're all learning about, you know, what AI can do for all of us. And I think just going back to AI just for a second, you know, I think as CEO, one of the challenges that I have in my company, and one of our investors always likes to talk to me about this, if we're not ahead of that game, you know, we're losing ground to our competition. Mm-hmm. So always we're evolving with this, and always we're trying to figure out how we can be more efficient in which areas of our business we should deep dive and which ones we should stay at a higher level. But I'm really glad you're in the space that you're in, but I can't help you with that question. It's an important one, though, which is why you're here and why you're on it. But if anybody else can help him with that afterwards, please. But what I'm excited about is you're here, and I'm excited about all the universities that are supporting this event. Because in reality, I always say, you know, my job as a CEO is to support members of my team like you. Members of my team that have creativity. You know, entrepreneurialism is one of our huge components at ClimeCo. And I think I'm sure it's at Schneider and, you know, other really innovative companies. So find an innovative company that really supports entrepreneurial vision like yours. And you'll be successful, and we'll be successful. I always say my responsibility is to prop up future leaders and future ideas. So if you were within my company, I'd love to learn more about what you're describing to see whether or not we would have the tools to help support it. But that's exciting. Thanks for bringing that up.
So I come from a slightly different perspective. We're an equipment finance company. So we're working with manufacturers, we're working with end user customers. A lot of what has been talked about in terms of both transition, about circularity, about insets, it's very much where we're focused. And I think if I piggyback on the questions around transportation and dare I say the Postal Service, I had a thought in mind. But I think one of the things we've seen in working with companies in certain markets is retrofitting or taking out diesel drivetrains, putting in electric kits. Mm-hmm. And there are companies that we've talked about doing that. I think there's a role for finance to play. And the biggest thing for me is it's exactly what this gentleman said, which is a lot of companies we talk to where they say, look, I want to decarbonize. I want to shift to, let's pretend it's electric for a moment. For the most part, the cost differential is just dramatic. And so if the government, if there's not a regulatory axe sitting above my neck or a big penalty, and this is as much for the manufacturers, we've just seen the shift in the EU, we're pushing back some of the limitations. And I guess one of the questions I wonder is, with the companies you guys are talking to, how much are you focused on kind of transition strategies for those companies who can't make the business case work? Because it seems to me that if you have assets in place, and a lot of them, that there's an opportunity to do something to them from a circularity perspective while achieving a lot of the goals that you have. Maybe that's not forever, but it bridges you from here to where maybe those new assets are a better price point.
You know, so just a story on how to get there. Emma, do you have any good examples of that?
Or if it's something you're seeing. I mean,
right.
I don't see it a lot here. I've seen it in other countries, not on a large scale.
Mm-hmm.
But I keep seeing it, and we work in lots of different industries, and it keeps coming back where the fleet operator is saying, I know I need to, I know I want to.
Mm-hmm.
I know I need to, I know I want to, but when my CFO tells me to go to electric and I'm in a cold climate,
right,
and that's going to meaningfully impact my operational, how that works, maybe that's not the way to go. And it feels like, to me, for a lot of reasons, there's kind of we want to do something. We truly do. We don't see the way to do it.
Right.
And the CFO is saying, but I need a business case.
Right.
So come to me with a business case.
Well, one of the things that I mean, we work a lot in the hard to decarbonize sector. And, you know, stories like yours sometimes scream for that's the story that says it's challenging for us to decarbonize. Like I can't go electric in a cold climate. It just doesn't work for me. So this is where I say why it's so important for companies to think about it a little bit differently. And it's kind of like working with some of our corporate tech clients who can't decarbonize all the way, but they want to. Well, how can they invest in markets or create, one of our corporate clients has created 10 million tons of demand for carbon. They couldn't cost effectively reduce the rest. They've reduced as much as they could, like some of your clients are. But then they're investing in projects to create real change now, because part of my presentation yesterday was that we have a crisis in front of us. So as your sectors are working for a 30-year plan, we have emissions right now that can be abated. So how do you take your demand or your client's demand and say, let's invest in projects that maybe that tell a good story for us, they're in our supply chain, but at a marginal cost, we can reduce those emissions now. And then how do you transfer those onto your product and digitally attach it and tell the story? Because we have our clients that are profitable, very profitable by telling that story. They can make money in these markets by doing that. But I think that the shame is that we're talking about a lot of markets right now that great example, a great example. They're really hard to decarbonize. And we can think a lot about it. We can think about alt fuels. We can think about hydrogen. We can think about electric. We can think about SAF. SAF's expensive. How's that going to drive bottom savings to USPS? Probably won't. So how can companies look to invest in other projects outside of that and then tell the story to your consumers that you're supporting that and it's part of your product? This is where we've had tremendous success. Because I think, that's the challenge. But guess what? There's a lot of opportunity right now, like Amazon just presented to with what they're doing with refrigerants around the world. There's a lot of opportunity right now to invest. And how do you do that, but also get the bang for the buck out of it? How do you make it profitable? How do you integrate it into your story?
Yeah, one really interesting, compelling story is around Amazon Climate Pledge Friendly. Harvard Business Review just published a independent research article on consumers seeing that green leaf and making the more sustainable choice. Brands are seeing anywhere between a 4% to a 40% sales lift based on that green leaf visual alone. Mm-hmm. So if given the choice, they will choose the better product, which is really a huge business case for sustainable branding.
Yeah, I call it B2B2C. We're not a B2C company. We probably never will be. But B2B2C, that platform gets to the C. And the C has spoken. On average, it is 12% lift. So, the total available market for companies that go onto those platforms, and why, it's because all of us are saying we're tired of feeling powerless. What can we do today to make a difference? And some of us are buying responsibly. We're going to sites like that to buy. And that's a great example.
Great. We have about 8 minutes left, so maybe 2 more questions.
Thank you. I work for BASF in corporate sustainability, and I think, as the previous question had said, there's lots of creative solutions that we'll have to come up with. But do you think that for us kind of being in the middle, right, do you think some of these solutions will help generate demand, or will kind of bypass the middle person while we're the one that, it could be skipped over if there's any kind of offsetting or insetting that takes place?
And can you tell me a little bit about the area of BASF that you're part of?
I'm general corporate sustainability, but of course just focused on more downstream chemicals. We go from anywhere from petrochemicals to also specialty chemicals as well.
Yeah, I've worked with some of your teams, and that's why I had to ask on the ammonia side, and Robert Fox and some of your teams are good friends of ClimeCo. But I think one of the cool stories at BASF is you're actually making a catalyst that we're deploying. So some of our catalysts that destroy nitrous oxide, millions of tons a year, are actually BASF catalysts. Mm-hmm. So thanks for all your innovation around that. But I think at the heart of what you do, petrochemical, is that's the story. I mean, we're in petrochemical plants around the world, looking at cost-effective reductions, and some of those exist within BASF, absolutely. But I always like to say to BASF, how are you telling the story about the cool story about how your catalysts are deployed? So it's almost like, the downstream, the impact that you're making, is significant too. So, but deep in the heart of what we're doing at every petrochemical plant, it's looking at ways to decarbonize. Whether or not it's a LSB Industries or an Ascend Performance Material or all the big petrochems. Which is why we went in with nitrous oxide abatement, because BASF also has emissions associated with your ammonia production and others. So, looking at ways to decarbonize cost effectively, certainly on the ammonia side, I'm sure BASF has looked at this, because a lot of on the steam methane reformers, the CO2 is so concentrated that even under the current IRA, it was in the money to collect and inject under CCS. So there's a lot of innovation on that part of the fence. But so that's a little bit of how I work with BASF. But I can say on the petrochemical side, that's a big part of our story. But I would also say that looking at it as an inset is the biggest challenge that we have. So some of our petrochem clients, they're selling our offsets as an inset, not as a premium, but just to get the business. So I don't think that the premium is there for the petrochems yet. They're not seeing it, because it's 3 steps downstream, for instance, like in my nylon 6,6, that they're seeing it. It's not, so how do you bring it forward? Well, how do we bring it forward is quite simple, because we track it. So if the emissions are reduced at the petrochem facility, and we're doing an inset all the way to North Face, wherever that goes, guess what? If we're retiring the emissions under a book and claim, the emission reductions at our petrochem facility in Ascend, they're getting the credit now for scope 1, which is fantastic, right? They never were when we sold it as an offset. They couldn't take claim for it. But the more we do for an inset, the more they support it, because they're getting the scope 1 reduction, and then we're bundling it with a product. Whether or not that facility bought the product from our Pensacola facility or not, it doesn't matter under book and claim. So I think that's a lot of the innovation, where the decarbonization strategies at the petrochem plants can be recognized now as a scope 1 reduction, rather than us selling the credits and them not being able to recognize it, but them able to get the money to support the projects.
Last word.
So I work with Axel Johnson, and we own and operate a number of different companies. We are mostly B2B, and we're either a co-manufacturer or a supplier to larger OEMs. So I'm very intrigued with the Amazon Leaf certification and those types of certifications, because we do try to come to our customers and say, we can help you get XYZ, which will improve your sales, and then hopefully we get a bigger market share of versus our competitors. So have you worked with co-manufacturers and tier 1, tier 2 suppliers in terms of creating products that they can then sort of sell to who is the label that they're producing for?
And can you give me an example of what you're doing?
So for example, the spouted pouches on food, right? Have you seen the kids have like the applesauces and things like that? So one of our companies produces about 50% of those in the world, in North America. So it's all the big labels that you're seeing. I can't say it obviously because we're under NDAs,
right.
But we're actually the ones producing that product and putting the labels and doing everything, and then we ship it out, and it sells under those bigger corporate names. So we're always looking for angles to say, we can help you make your products either more sustainable or be more marketable under sustainability, and then use that to gain market share. So it makes it a little more difficult for us, because we can come with ideas, but if they say no, right? Like, hey, we have a monofilament pouch that's recycle ready, right? They may or may not take that, but we have to develop it and do that. So it makes it a little harder for us to do ROIs on some of these things, because we can see the value in it, but we're not the final decision maker. All we can do is sort of create almost a theoretical product and say, here, can you, here's a way you can do it. Have you worked with co-manufacturers in that way to say, hey, look, we're gonna go through the certification process to get the leaf for you, and that way every time we produce the applesauce for you, it has the leaf on it, and you can sell it at a higher rate versus a competitor that wouldn't be able to do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a lot of the LEAF program, is direct to consumer. So those are products like vitamin companies or gaming companies that they know that their buyers are looking to buy a low carbon product and they want to buy responsibly. So that LEAF goes directly to the consumer. but there's no reason why it wouldn't correlate to your vertical stack. I'm kind of wondering whether or not you feel like you're pushing or you're not being pulled for a solution.
Both. So oftentimes they'll come to us and say, they're looking to us to come with ideas on, decarbonization and things for their products. But about half the time it's us, we're trying to be a little bit more proactive with our customers and use it as a business advantage, right? Where we're coming in specifically on the sustainability angle. We're looking at a lot of our competitors and we're seeing what they're offering and we're saying, we can help you meet your goal better than our competitor can, or we can actually help you build a product that's going to increase your sales around specifically sustainability. But again, we have that one-step removal where all we can do is offer these things. So I didn't know if that's something you had experience with, maybe some ideas or anything you've worked with in the past.
Yeah, I mean, our team certainly does. We have a whole team led by Emily Damon, our Chief Growth Officer, that is integrating the entire supply chain. So working with like the AIM platform and others to look at every step and then contact that supply chain to identify where those changes can occur and how they can roll up into the final product. So I think there's members of our team that are just focused on that insetting and the badging that I think would be really valuable to talk to. And I guess one of my questions is, when you're selling it, is it more than a durability, or is the story also a cost savings, or is it more associated with the product itself being more sustainable? Is there also a financial advantage?
Well, there has to be a financial edge to it, or they're simply not going to do it. Absolutely.
Okay.
So our thing would be, we can modify or create the process to get this badge or certification on a product that's under your label, that we can show you that will increase your sales, where we're saying 12 to 40%, right? We can show these statistics and say, if we go through the process of getting this badge for this product and label it for you and increase the sales, that eventually the idea is to lead to more sales coming from us, obviously, because if you have two suppliers and one of them is giving you something that sells 10% more than the other, you're obviously going to go to this one. So it is, our big goal here is to try to find ways to make sustainability more marketable in terms of increasing our revenue. And what that comes down to, since we're not directly selling these products, is giving products to these OEMs and these sellers that will increase their sales, or are cheaper, or have lower embedded carbon, something that's marketable or directly financially viable.
So I have an idea for you. This is what you want to do. Put together a pitch for them. So think on their behalf as their CFO and let them know how they can earn the green label for their product. Let's get the data that we have from Harvard and show them that in their sector, they can get the total available market for their product is going to escalate. You're going to bring the strategy to them as a supplier. So your badge for your product is going to be part of the reason why they earn theirs, because they have to show decarbonization within their supply chain to earn it. So you're already part of the solution for them. So you can lay out a strategy which is know their LCA, know your percentage of it, show them that you're going to actually lower their percentage, and you're going to help them earn the right to get the badge. And by them getting that badge on this platform, their TAM is going to go up 12%. So maybe it's kind of a reverse pitch to think through their lens, but you're the catalyst for them. So educate them, and this is something where our team could. So that's the creativity, I think, on your end. Like, how do you, like pushing a rope uphill? How do you get them to say, yeah, Omar, I'm pulling you. Yeah. I want you. Thank you for this. We could help you with that, just as a strategy, just to brainstorm it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, in some of the places where we're the co-manufacturer, we pretty much are the supply chain, right?
You are the supply chain, right.
We're taking everything from the raw materials, creating the product, putting the label on it, and shipping it directly to their distribution. Like, they don't even see it. They don't even touch it. So that's where we have, in that particular company, we have a bit more control over the product itself, that we could say, we're going to manufacture this to meet this badge. You don't have to do anything, right? But it might cost you a little bit more, right? Or it might just be that we're getting more business from you. Right. There are other parts where we're just doing a component. Now that's where more along the lines we come in and say, hey, look, we can create this component for you, and we can have it, certified zero carbon, right? Or, carbon neutral or net zero, or however they want to see it. But then we miss that piece where you were talking about is, well, you have all the other components of this piece of equipment, and we're just a small piece of it.
Right.
So those are more when we have to come with more of a theoretical product. But I'm thinking where we're more of a co-manufacturer,
Right.
we could come and say, we can create this for you. You don't have to do anything. And here's the potential upside for it. And we'll get the certification and everything. You don't have to do anything about it. And that's where I was wondering if you had experience with any other co-manufacturers doing something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, if not,
Yeah.
that's great, because that means we're the first ones to come up with the idea, and that's amazing.
Let's talk about it more.
Yeah, we should definitely.
Yeah.
You want to wrap up?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting how a lot of the conversation that we've spoken about, if I can just reflect on it a little bit, a lot of discussion around insetting. I think that's the evolution of it, but we're not going to be there today or tomorrow. And the question is, how do we reduce carbon now to create the optionality of bringing it in as an inset? Or the optionality of being able to create a market for it to help fund technologies now through an offset. So I think we're in an interesting spectrum of both. Some stories like the recycling of computers and the reuse, they don't fit an offset story. It fit an amazing inset story, and I remember that one well, and that's a great example of that. I think the co-packaging, how petrochemicals look at creating value downstream as the CSO, all these questions are really great. Transportation, these are hard to decarbonize. It's like when we're working with a cement company, and how do you decarbonize a cement kiln without IRA funding when the marginal cost of abatement is $250 a ton? It's really difficult. So where can they invest in their supply chain to mitigate now? So think about mitigating now, affixing to your product, telling the story and creating a value. A lot of it's storytelling. So I think I'm hearing a lot about insetting. That's exciting because I think that's where the market is going. But when the green premium isn't there yet, and you can't talk in de-risking the supply chain doesn't sell the practice change, how the heck else do you go about it? Right, and that's where some of the market-based mechanisms come in. So yeah, I mean, I learned a lot from all of you. I think the challenges were great. I hope we solve the data center and figure out exactly how we integrate in there and help them with their overall solutions. Yeah, thanks for the amazing questions. I really appreciated it. Fun stuff. Thanks.